So Brexiteers are obsessed with this idea that in reality Britain is this secret superpower that has been chained down since the 70s by the EU. But that is just not the case at all. You know, and this idea of a global Britain is a complete myth. You know, it's shocking that you have a Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, coming out and saying that we should reinstate imperial defence policy by having all these naval bases all over the world. Why? What's the benefit of having naval bases all over the world? You know, the only reason he would do that is to project control over the colonies. Colonies we do not have anymore, unless, you know, people are actually seriously suggesting we start to go and, you know, take colonies again. That's where this myth comes from, and that's where it, you know, that's the logical conclusion of a lot of these, what a lot of these people are saying. So this is in the New European, and it's the grim truth behind the global Britain myth. The reality of Britain's position after it leaves the EU is becoming clearer. So, as the Brexit discussion continues, an ever-high volume with ever-high decreasing coherence, its enthusiasts have found a new concept, a new mantra to shout at an ever-increased frequency. It has become impossible to say that the UK will get a fantastic deal from the EU because of our brilliant leverage. We don't hear so often anymore about how German car manufacturers will intervene to make sure that we get our way. And we don't really hear anymore about how much better off we'll be overnight. These crises have been replaced by promises of adequate food. Yeah, I want to remind people about that we will have adequate food after Brexit. Bear in mind, they are preparing for riots after Brexit. So, yeah, fun times. So, faced with the grim realities of Brexit, its cheerleaders are instead relying on nostalgic cries of global Britain. Leaving the EU, they argue, will let us take our place on the world stage in a way we haven't before. Luckily, they leave this idea so ill-defined, as there is no possible way we can truly define global Britain that leaves it anything more as a fiction. In the early days after the vote, Brexiteers said that global Britain was about trade, and after leaving the EU, we will be able to sign more and better deals at speed. Liam Fox, the man who resigned the Defence Secretary role in disgrace after appearing to be unaware that bringing an undeclared lobbyist along on his overseas official visits was a bad idea, promised that he'd have 40 such deals signed by the time the UK left the EU. This week, Fox sought much fanfare for a deal which he had finally signed, one which in reality was an agreement with Switzerland, which we could continue to trade on the same terms that we do now once we leave the Union. He heroically managed to maintain the status quo with just one of our trading partners. Elsewhere, Japan has publicly stated that it will not offer the UK the same terms as a standalone country as it was willing to offer us when we were part of the world's largest economic bloc, known for its ferocious trade negotiations. And the EU itself, which, thanks to geography and our long-standing relationships, will remain our closest trading partner, has set out several models for how we can trade in the future, but it made clear that no EU nation will be offered terms as generous as a member would be. If they did, after all, why would anyone need to be a member? Some like to turn to the idea of the Anglosphere. the USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. The idea that unified by a common language, for some reason they leave out several other countries that share English as a language. There is an effective, they claim that there is an effective political and cultural bloc which can be established. These 5 nations are already close military and intelligence allies. They form the so-called Five Eyes Spying Coalition, unimpeded by the UK's membership of the EU. But when it comes to thinking beyond that, this union makes little sense. The countries are geographically dispersed, and it is possible to be seriously limited trade. The USA has made it clear that there will be no favourable trade deals for the UK without major concessions on food and agricultural standards, and the USA, Australia and New Zealand are among the first nations laying objections to the UK attempting a simple transition to WTO terms. Business clearly is business. Even culturally, this union is less close than those who tend to speak to it imagine. Because we share a few hit television series doesn't a common culture make. Any Brit who has lived in America, or any American who has done the reverse, will quickly tell you it is a huge mistake to think of any other country as the UK with a different accent. We have much or more in common with our near European neighbours than with the USA. Part of the mistake of the global Britain myth is just a misunderstanding of our size as a country. We are one of the world's largest economies, and around 1 in 100 on the planet right now we live. And around 1 in 100 on the planet right now we live in the UK. We are lucky. Our egos, which would not be able to handle it, not a small country. But we are also not able at the absolute top table. One of our polls around which global affairs coalesce, the USA, is one such poll. Even if no one right now is quite sure exactly what it stands for, China is another. The EU is a poll, representing a certain vision for a multilateral world order, and Russia seeks to be another. Could Britain, at this stage, only a borderline top-tier military power, despite this week's eye-catching decision to deploy a new aircraft carrier, the HMS Queen Elizabeth, to the Pacific region, really claim to be such a poll? Who would rally to it, and why? Why would our distinctive vision be part of the world, be part of a global economy, only if you let the UK get its way, even if we step out? Global visions are a rallying cry. It reveals, even after a shallow thought, all the incoherences of the Brexit position. A call for isolationism, while disastrous, would be at least honest. But the global Britain logic for Brexiteers calls on us to leave the largest political and economic union on the planet, over which we held huge sway, to somehow become a bigger player on the world stage. There are people who these are the people who led the charge for Brexit, with differing degrees of enthusiasm. These are the people Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn are following, taking us with them, onwards, then onwards to a muddled future. You know, this whole idea that we are somehow going to be better than we were outside the EU is completely false. And as it said there, the EU is one of the most powerful economic and political trade blocs on the planet. How are we going to be better outside this trading bloc? And like I say, the EU is not going anywhere, despite the claims of the Brexiteers about, oh, the EU will collapse in 10 years. They've been saying that for decades. You can literally, and I've said this before, someone desperately needs to make a video of this. You can go back of every single time that a Eurosceptic has made this. In fact, you could go back and do a video compilation and timeline it of when Farage has said these claims that the EU is going to collapse, and also passing along the dates of when he said the EU is apparently going to collapse and then hasn't collapsed. I've said this before many times. There is a huge difference between British Eurosceptics and European Eurosceptics. European Eurosceptics love the single market. They do not like the political union stuff, and they have all, a lot of the other, generally same complaints. But one of the things that they do understand is that there needs to be some level of political unification in order for the single market to work, particularly regulatory alignment. That is how the single market works. That is how it has become one of the largest economic trading blocks on the planet. That is why it has so much clout on the world economic stage. This is why Japan, after Trump dismissed the TTP, Japan immediately went to Europe and said, okay, let's do this deal. Notice they went to Europe first and not us. And the whole reason is said, yeah, we're going to get a better deal from you than you were if you were in Europe. Basically mean Japan is going to wait until we are so over the barrel that they can just take us for everything they can. That is, that is the very definition of weakness. And yet so many Brexiteers are championing that statement as if it's somehow a good thing. You've got, there was a really good article, which I think we might go over, of the lobbyists of the meat and agricultural industry basically setting out what they are basically going to demand us to do. And by the way, there's a lot of loss of sovereignty in what they have been saying, but the Brexiteers are nowhere to be seen, chastising these lobbyists. How dare they come and, make demands of the UK, which was, again, what they were saying at the time of, when we were in the EU, and the EU said, well, these are the regulations. It was, how dare you make these laws and regulations? It's just bizarre. They're here on one thing but not on another, and it's telling that they have no clue really about how the EU works, world trade in general, and the political and economic realities of the UK. We are a tiny nation. Currently, we are, again, one of the top nations. But bear in mind, since the Brexit vote, we have slipped from 6th down to 7th. That is not what a lot of people have been reporting, but that's happened. And as our economy gets slower and worse, we are going to slide down that table even more. But that's what, we said would happen, and Brexiteers just said, oh no, Project Fear. And remember, guys, March the 29th, from that date, is the date where, if that ends up happening and we leave, that is the date from when you can actually say the Brexit is now having to start in effect. So these past 2 years, from 2016, I've been, as I've said to people before, enjoy them because they are the last 2 good years we will potentially have in the UK for a significant period of time. And there you go. No deal is the biggest act of economic self-harm ever. And remember, guys, this is apparently what you voted for. As all these leading Brexiteers say. So